Today I will explain a 2023 crime, drama, and horror film, Night of the Hunted. Get comfortable. The movie begins at 2 a.m. at a motel where a young woman named Alice is lodged. She is awakened by a phone call from her boyfriend, Eric. She proceeds to receive the call in her bathroom, where she and Eric discuss their meeting with a fertility doctor later that morning. However, Alice teases him that it is too early in the morning to be talking on the phone. Eric explains that he couldn't sleep all night. Eric tells her his friend, John, will come pick her up soon and warns her about a possible delay on the freeway. A while later, their conversation is interrupted when a stranger joins Alice in the toilet. Some moments later, Alice is dressed and joins John, a handsome dark-skinned man, in the car. During the trip, Alice ignores a call from Eric despite John's insistence on picking up the call. The duo has a brief conversation, indicating that John and Alice may be having a secret affair. John asks if Eric suspects anything, but Alice says he doesn't. She tells John to trust her, but he gives her a surprised glare, insinuating that he cannot trust her. Momentarily, the car's gas tank indicator starts to blink, and Alice asks why he didn't buy gas like she told him to the day before, but John insists that he did. She teases him that she will kill him if they are late. John says he knows what her problem is, but Alice angrily retorts that her problem is that every man thinks they know what her problem is, quieting John. It's not long after they stop at a gas station. John fills up the gas tank but doesn't realize the tank is leaking. Meanwhile, Alice is inside the gas station's convenience store. She grabs a cup of coffee and goes to the store looking for other things to buy. While filling the tank, John sees a strange signboard that says, God is nowhere. In the meantime, Alice checks around for the cashier but doesn't see anyone. She wants to pay for the item she took. She steps outside for a moment to let John know that something is wrong. When she steps back inside, she leaves money on the cashier's desk and notices bloodstains on the wall. She becomes frightened and attempts to escape, but out of the blue, an unseen armed assailant shoots her in the arm. Alice attempts to hide, but the shooter keeps shooting at the store. Alice hides in a corner and screams John's name. Unfortunately, John cannot hear her scream. John is distracted by the loud music he is playing in the car. Alice continues to bleed from her arm and tears a piece of her clothes to cover the wound. After a while, she stood to peep at the entrance and noticed the same signboard John had seen earlier. The unseen sniper shoots at her again, but Alice is unharmed. Alice turns around and attempts to call John's attention again, but he still cannot hear her. She then decides to go for her phone, which fell earlier, but as she nears her cell phone, the sniper shoots her phone, destroying the device. To her relief, someone on a two-way radio calls out the cashier's name, Amelia. However, when Amelia doesn't respond, he becomes suspicious. Alice then seizes the opportunity to distract the shooter and makes her way to the walkie-talkie. Meanwhile, in the car, the gas tank indicator starts to blink again, surprising John. John steps out of the car and notices the gas tank is leaking. Inside the store, Alice picks up the phone and responds. She explains the situation to the caller, but in the midst of their conversation, John walks in looking for Alice but is shot in the neck by the shooter. John struggles to crawl up to Alice, but the shooter shoots him again, killing him this time. Alice covers her mouth to keep herself from screaming. The unknown caller explained that the store's cashier, Amelia, was his wife and expressed concern about her safety. He also assures Alice that he has called the police and that his son will arrive at her location. Momentarily, he starts to question Alice about her relationship and why they were out so late. Alice tells him that John is only her friend and that they are returning from a convention. After a brief moment, the caller reveals himself as the shooter, causing Alice to panic and throw the phone away. The shooter taunts Alice and threatens to come over. Sensing the potential danger in that, she picked up the phone again and asked him to leave her alone. While she engages him in conversation, as a distraction, she unsuccessfully attempts to throw some batteries at the light switch to turn off the lights. When it doesn't work, she realizes the store's stand has wheels and uses the stand as a shield, moving toward the switch. The shooter unsuccessfully attempts to shoot Alice as his target is protected by the metal stand. Thankfully, Alice reaches the switch and turns off the store's light, limiting the shooter's vision. Alice continues to attempt to make radio contact with the outside world through the two-way radio, but the shooter responds again. honest at this time. He says he has a personal vendetta with Alice. Meanwhile, Alice soon discovers Amelia's body. The shooter explains that his wife was bored of him, insinuating that he took her life because she was no longer happy in their marriage and cheated on him. Alice keeps him distracted and attempts to reach the car. She uses the car keys to track the car's location, but the shooter shoots the engines, damaging the car. He also gets a glimpse of her location in the store when a car passes by and shoots at her again. Alice seals up her wound and takes some pills for relief. She uses a mirror to spy on the shooter and sees another car drive by. The driver, named Doug, steps into the store, and a panicked Alice warns him that they are being shot at. However, Alice becomes skeptical when the shooter stops shooting and accuses Doug of being the shooter. She grabs a hammer to protect herself. Doug reveals he works a night shift nearby and usually spends time with Amelia. After arguing for a bit about how to avoid the shooter, Alice convinces Doug to attempt to retrieve his phone from the car. He frightfully walks out of the store while Alice uses a flashlight to distract the shooter. Doug makes it outside, but when he attempts to take his phone, he's shot dead by the shooter. The shooter accuses Alice of intentionally setting up Doug for his death. Alice keeps talking to the shooter, who reveals he knows about Alice's position as the vice president of marketing at a pharmaceutical company that sells harmful drugs. He accuses her of murdering innocent lives with their drugs. He also explains that Alice didn't merit her role because she made love with her boss to get to her current position. His words sting her. He adds that he lost his job and a child. In the meantime, Alice uses several umbrellas to create a barricade, keeping the shooter distracted by talking to him on the radio. The shooter eventually starts to shoot at her, and a frustrated Alice unsuccessfully attempts to use a fire extinguisher to break the exit door. She breaks down in tears and sits behind a shelf. Moments later, a passerby stops by the gas station outside to buy fuel, and a frightened Alice, hiding behind one of the shelves, wants him to leave. For her relief, the man gives off and drives away, avoiding certain death. The shooter and Alice continue to talk while she is seated in a corner, and he reveals that he knows about her affair with John. He accuses her of being an uncommitted wife. Still, Alice tearfully defends herself, claiming that she has spent the majority of her life pleasing men and that she was having an affair with John because she was in pain and not for love. At that moment, a police vehicle drives by, relieving Alice, but her relief is short-lived as the car drives off, leaving her to deal with the shooter still. Alice successfully attempts to make it out of the store and tries to get in the car, but the shooter soon spots her and opens fire at her. To save herself, Alice races back into the store, but not without taking a hit. At this time, she's shot in the leg. She crawls about the store in pain and passes out. She wakes up a few moments later and proceeds to cover up her leg wound. The shooter argues that just because Alice is holding a gun, it doesn't make her less of a killer. He accuses her of being greedy and selfish. After Alice seals up her leg wound, she attempts to cut through the padlock on the exit door but cuts herself in the process. Alice picks up the radio, suspecting that the killer is a colleague named Henry. She apologizes for his child and Job, but the shooter is confused. He asks who Henry is, but they are interrupted when another car stops by. An aged man steps out of the vehicle and notices Doug's corpse, but before he can get away, the shooter silences him. His wife, also an elderly woman, runs to the scene, but she is also shot. The couple is killed in an instant. Alice and the shooter continue to yell at each other, and suddenly Alice notices a little girl in the back of the car. She warns the child to stay in the car, but she steps out to check on her grandparents. Alice begs the shooter not to kill the innocent child, and he offers to spare her life in exchange for the child. Alice is skeptical, but the shooter insists she'll be proving him wrong if she sacrifices herself for the child. Alice signals the child to run to the road, but the child instead runs toward Alice. Alice traps the door while the shooter comes out of hiding, revealing that he had been hiding at the top of the large signboard she and John noticed earlier. Joyce is able to cut through the padlock, and she escapes to the garage with the child. She asks the child to hide and sing her favorite song if she gets scared. In the meantime, the shooter enters the store and searches around for Alice and the child. He soon encounters the hiding Alice, who stabs him. The two struggle as he attempts to overpower the resilient Alice. He eventually shoots Alice and she feigns death. The shooter makes his way to the child, but before he can take the child, Alice attacks him with a fire extinguisher and asks the child to run. She struggles with the shooter and forcefully pulls him to the garage door. She traps him and attempts to see his face. The garage door traps the killer and crushes his head, decapitating him. A wounded Alice draws her last breaths as the frightened child watches. Alice passes away, succumbing to her wounds, and the child runs off into the early morning sunlight, uncertain of the future. The end. That was all from the video. Subscribe to this channel to watch more content like this. See you next time.